This is the Michael Brian Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. And I am joined with Alison Godfrey, who is an executive coach with over 4 decades of experience. And she's a former C-suite executive as well. So, Alison, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm wondering what are some of the main aspects are of leadership, because it's quite a broad term, really, but how do you think about it?
I think about leadership as really being in relationship with people. And being in relationship has to do with listening to the other person and what are their needs, where are they in life. And of course, leadership, as we're referring to it, has to do with organizations. So it's within the context of organizational needs.
Would you say that things have shifted, let's say, over the past 5 to 10 years? Has the role of being a leader changed over time?
Oh, yeah, I think it has. I think that we saw a very big shift when the pandemic hit, where we became very sensitive to high EQ and what are the needs of the employee. And we started really banding together, I think, as different societies around the world with what has shifted for the individual work-life balance. What does that look like? How are the needs of the society and the individual playing into the needs of the corporation? And really looking at remote work and how is that possible? And then on my words are unfortunately now, um, at least in the United States, and I believe in other places in Europe, we are seeing very autocratic societies coming back, where our leaders are very much, especially in the United States, dictatorial. We're moving away from the needs of the employee. We're looking at the needs of the corporation, money driven, not what is necessarily good for the individual. And leadership is therefore, they are trying, our leaders are trying to redefine yet again what a leader is. Fortunately, we are seeing a lot of resistance to that, and that corporations may be forced to take things like DEI out of the nomenclature, but that the corporations are still keeping the policies themselves in place.
I find the idea of listening to people an interesting thing only because the people that are in the companies that are in management positions, they're people as well. So I wonder, how do you balance the needs of employees versus management versus board directors, if you want to go that far, because everyone's a person, really.
It's true, everybody is a person. It's very hard. And we're looking at where is that line? Where is the line, right, of our values? And being asked to cross our line. And when do you just say, no, I can't do that as a human being? And it's hard. I don't want to make light of that and just say, you can't do that. Just say no. There are families to feed and you are employed. And it doesn't mean that you can just quit because of your values. Yet at the same time, we would like to believe in ourselves that we do have that strength and we will find another job and we will find another way to survive, and that we won't compromise ourselves and our values like that. Um, and there is a point at which we have to just say no and take some risks in our lives and band together and not allow ourselves to be forced to cross our line where it's just unacceptable to ourselves to behave that way.
Do you really I guess, do you find that this idea of listening to people, which some people may know as being compassionate or empathetic, that sort of thing, do you think that that has become front and center in terms of leadership as more about the people that you're serving versus the company that everyone is serving?
I believe it goes hand in hand. And that what I'm seeing is that I hope I'm answering your question correctly. And if not, please stop me if I'm down a rabbit hole. That the financial needs of the corporation, because that's what we're looking at, right? The stakeholders and making the corporation financially successful. And what I'm seeing is that the individuals are looking at it is that we can do both. We can serve our people and we can make the corporation financially successful, and they are not mutually exclusive. And that the individuals might be told that we cannot put a spotlight, for instance, on DEI, which is very sad. However, we are going to treat our people with respect and dignity and equality, whether or not we are told we can put a spotlight on that.
I think the idea of it going hand in hand and helping certain people is helping everybody. I find that a fascinating concept. And actually, Alison, my head actually went straight to, well, surely having the right people working for you makes this easier. If the recruitment was a little bit more refined or clear, then it wouldn't be a difficult job to make sure that everyone's happy.
Oh, wow. What a wonderful point, Mike. Yes, that's right. And that's such a wonderful point about recruitment is that I work with a lot of startups. And so one of the things that I do is help them work on their culture. And if you're going to work on culture, you have to make sure that your um, values are in writing. Well, if you're going to put your values in writing, then you have to have behaviors with each value. What does that look like in day to day? How do we treat each other? And therefore, when you're recruiting and you're interviewing someone, you want to interview for those values. And it doesn't make the person right or wrong. We're not judging, but is this a value for you? Is this how this other person treats someone else? So, what happens, for instance, with you? What do you do when someone makes a mistake? How do you treat the other person? Is that a value? And you get angry. How many mistakes is somebody allowed to make? What, et cetera, et cetera. I can go down many different rabbit holes here, but what does that look like? And what is acceptable within the culture of your organization?
Are there any things that the leader should possess or any tools in the toolbox of leadership that foster this kind of mutually beneficial relationship? Because it seems like while having the right people there could make a difference, it all comes down to the person at the helm, the person that's able to empower everybody and lead everything forwards, that there are some elements that they could do to improve those things.
Yeah, it's so true. It does all flow from the top, doesn't it? And who that leader is and what values that leader holds. I think number one for a leader is what we used to call, and we really don't have a new name for it, but soft skills. And that 80% of leadership has to do with those skills. It's not about the technical skills anymore. You might have needed those to get up to where you are in leadership, but then those go away. And it's all about how you go into relationship and the trust factor about letting go, and that you trust that you've brought the right people into their jobs, and that you are listening and you're creating that conversation so that people have the ability to speak to their direct managers, and their managers can bring the information up the line, that you're not afraid as a leader of feedback, which means you're willing to grow and change. It is really being able to model the behavior as that if you're telling me that the my intention might be good, but my impact is off the mark, I need to know that. And as a leader, you're modeling that behavior and you're willing to change. And that when times are very difficult, you acknowledge that times are difficult, but you remain inspirational and positive so that people have hope, and you're bringing that hope. I think today, in today's world, that's very important for our leaders, is to remain positive and hopeful, at the same time acknowledging how difficult our times are. And my hero is actually Viktor Frankl, who had the ability to go through the concentration camps and still come out as a very whole, inspirational person. And what he was saying is you can't be defined by the external world. It's about who you are internally. What a powerful, beautiful message as a leader.
I imagine how that would come across could be quite different. Like if you're in, let's say you're in a bad place as a leader, you would come across different than if you were in a positive place. So I wonder how could you encourage that? How could you encourage the leaders to be in a positive place so that even when things are stressful, as you said, don't be overcome by the outside world, but how can you be more bulletproof to that?
Being a leader is very lonely and very difficult. You bring up such a great point about who's talking to our leaders, who's helping our leaders be leaders. And it is, this is a very stilted point of view because I'm an executive coach, but that is what coaching is about, because the leaders are alone. They can't speak with their board of directors. Of course, that's not where you go for those close relationships. And you don't want to speak to your C-suite because you're supposed to be there for your C-suite in that hopeful, positive space. So who's helping you be positive? And what does that look like? And you really need someone to speak with, that you can say, this is hard. It is hard. What is going on in the world right now is affecting me. So that you've got someone that can ground you and talk about, don't get lost in the fear. You need to stand in the strength of the hope. And it is true that it may take a long time, but our stories as human beings do all ultimately have happy endings. It may take a while, but they do have happy endings. And we need to remember that and stand in that place.
I imagine that the leader's also responsible for some of the best things that companies can achieve. If you think of people that are in those positions, things like being creative or coming up with amazing ideas, being innovative, all of these things that we've come to associate with a successful company. What kind of things do leaders need to possess to be able to do those things? It seems like a magical thing when it happens, but we can't really forget the people behind those things. So how can
Mhm.
they do that?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing. And you're right. It does seem like it's magical, but it does come from, I believe it comes from very open leadership, where it is a beautiful collaboration, where you have a leader that is listening. And when you've got a leadership team that is also listening, so that ideas are bubbling up through the corporation. And it would be impossible to point a finger to one human being. For instance, if you look at who a great imaginative company would be Apple, for instance. They come out with great new products, and we all can't wait to see what the next generation is. What new thing have they come out with? And they completely changed how we, for instance, listen to music or how we think of computers and what the software is. It is an entire organization that has fostered creativity. We want new ideas. And when you create a culture based on new and innovation, that's how that happens. And we love new ideas. And don't corporations, for instance, that are predicated upon the status quo, that's not how we do things here. Those are the corporations that die. That is certain death. And the human being that is open to change, that's where the magic is going to happen. Let's do something different today. And certainly in our world of large language models and pending AI, generative AI, that's going to be a whole new world for us.
With the idea of technology taking over as well, you mentioned AI, and I find it fascinating how leadership would likely have to shift when that happens. Where do you suppose leadership would need to go when technology becomes an everyday thing? Companies are using it all the time. What do leaders need to do then?
I think that we will see a complete new leadership. And I don't know what it's going to be yet. I do know that it is going to be completely different than what we are embracing today. And that's part of what is so exciting because I believe that it's going to look like a quantum leap, not like an iterative process, that it will change in a way that we can't imagine very, very quickly. And it will go from here to there, and we won't really see the steps in between. And that it will be such a different world. For me, the idea of that kind of change is just so explosive and so exciting. I can't imagine what it will be like for those lucky human beings that are alive through that. Because it's just going to be so different. And it opens up the possibility of us being able to live in such, for instance, it could be such an intellectual space where we are no longer going to have to do the kinds of jobs we do today, where we think about the intellectual society, for instance, of the Greeks. How much fun! That may be the space that we live in, where it's just about our minds. I can't even imagine spirituality, intellectualism, creativity, all the things that are uniquely human, and the rest of it is handled mechanically. Could be extraordinary.
I definitely agree with that. It sounds extraordinary. And it's making me think actually, like where would companies go? Let's say we get there and we've got creativity. Most of it is built around the things that make us uniquely human. But then if AI progresses, that may be replaced as well. What do we do then? Like where do we put our value system when work and money and finances and even success to a certain degree, the value of those things start to decline when it's being replaced, it's being easily achievable. What happens then?
Right? It would be a completely different society. And we truly would be living in our values, right? Can you imagine where it would be about relationship and valuing learning and education and our intellectualism. I wonder how advanced our brains could really be living in a society like that, and where all actual doing could be done by some type of a computer and or a robot could be doing those things. I'm not sure what a human would bring to that, where farming, food production, all of that could be done automatically. And that our uniqueness as humans would be in a completely different space. And beauty would be up to us and what we are creating around us intellectually, writing the books. I don't know. Right now, I don't know that we've even given ourselves the freedom to think about those possibilities. What is possible? I don't know that I can even dream that large.
I honestly never thought we'd get to this point, Alison.
I didn't either. We really went out there with leadership, didn't we? This isn't what I expected my brain to go to. We could come back down to today.
Yeah, come back down to earth a little bit. But I think it's an interesting point because leaders might be all that's left. We might not be leading people, we might be leading the robots building skyscrapers for us, that sort of thing. Like it becomes the leader role could be all that's left within, let's say, corporate world. The rest of us are just going to be living, creating, and hopefully the role of money might change because not many of us will actually be working and earning it.
Yeah, it might be. It might be a completely different role of a leader, and it may be leading a complete corporate world of robots. I'm not sure. I do think we are very far from there, though. I think that the mastering the intricacies of the human brain is not tomorrow. I think we're not there yet. I think a lot of what we are doing today can be taken over by our advanced large language models that do exist today. And what we're calling AI, not necessarily the human brain type generative AI yet, but leadership as we know it for humans, I think does look like today. A leader needs to also know when to change styles, that you can't pick a leadership style, for instance, and just stay there. So when I'm talking about you need very high EQ, emotional intelligence, and it also includes when you need to be authoritative and just make a decision and go with it and take full responsibility for that. And you need to know when you have to set boundaries and go with those. Be a little more firm, be a little more gentle. When you need to ask questions, when you need to mentor and teach. That's part of being a leader, is not choosing one style.
Do you find that the ability to swap between them or decide which style to use is important, but then do you need to, I guess, communicate the shift in style because you might not necessarily give them any warning. Maybe you suddenly break out into teacher mode and you think, oh, okay, I'll try and teach them something because they don't seem to grasp it, but they're not necessarily ready for that.
It's, it's a good question, so that you don't seem like you're schizophrenic and you've got 14 personalities. What I think is most important in it is being authentic so that you don't become Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that you're still you. And there's the core of you no matter what you're doing. And that I think the idea that you just brought up of warning somebody that you're shifting styles is a great idea. And even as a coach, I will say to people, you can stop me at any time, but I am about to give you some information that I believe I have from my experience that you may not have experienced yet that may be helpful. So I'm switching into a bit of a teacher mode, and I'll tell them what I have learned from my experience. So yes, I think that's highly valuable as a leader to come in and out of styles and warn somebody that, especially when you are um, bringing somebody along and they are, for instance, doing something that they're in a position where they need to learn something. And you don't want to just tell them what to do because you would like them to figure out how to do it themselves. So you're saying, okay, uh, I notice this isn't going very well. What are you seeing yourself? And start those conversations. How might you correct it? What would be different? How could you do this differently? When would you like to try to do it by? And start those kinds of conversations. And then if it's still not working, okay, I'm going to give you a suggestion about how you might change what you're doing. Let's try it this way and start bringing somebody along that way and trying to improve their performance. Does that get to the point a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And I actually wonder what your thoughts are on this idea of communicating things, because a lot of times wires might get crossed, people might take things the wrong way, or at least not how it was intended. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because it must happen every day in your kind of spaces. And I think people need to be able to have these conversations, be able to admit when things are wrong on both sides, in order to progress. Because I think a lot of people these days are so convinced that they're right when it might actually be hindering things, not making things better.
Yeah, that is so frequent in relationship where the intention is not at all what the impact is. And um, I know I very much experienced that for myself, where as a Jersey girl, I felt that I was telling the truth. Well, I was telling the truth. My style was as a lioness. And as I was roaring my truth, the impact on people was, as a leader, was intimidation and harsh. I came across as being very harsh and barking orders. I would turn people off. It was very difficult and creating a rift between myself and those individuals I was trying to lead and manage. It took me a while to learn that it was not about just being a Jersey girl, that what was really going on was that I was just trying to tell the truth. And if I was just trying to tell the truth, and that was my intention, I could change my style and still tell the truth. And then the impact on other people would be different. And I did not understand that the impact on what my impact on other people was and how devastating it was. I didn't understand that. And it took a while and a lot of feedback for me to understand what was really going on and that it was important in leadership to not do that. And I think that the value of feedback and giving it in organizations is where this starts. So the leader has to be open to feedback, but the organization has to be built on it. And I think that that's where a lot of the cultural rift occurs is that there is not enough feedback. And the individuals are not hearing or getting the feedback that what they're doing is not helpful to the people around them. It's actually damaging. And that's what I see more than anything, is that the person doesn't understand that what they're doing is really hurting the team. So as a coach, I'm going in and dealing with individuals and having to say to them, do you understand that your behavior is actually damaging the team? And people are shocked. They're not seeing or hearing from the other members of the team the impact of their behavior. I'm just telling the truth, is what they're telling me. I'm just being blunt and honest. Well, the way that comes across is mean and nasty. And then we can start working on delivery and how you actually say things.
It sounds to me, Alison, like it's a combination of things going on. You've got being worried of the consequences of giving the feedback in, let's say, an inappropriate way, then the other person not necessarily wanting to hear the feedback. So it seems like a very defensive conversation where everyone is worried about how the other person is going to take it. And then there's always a handful that, let's just say, they care a little bit less about how things are going to go and will likely just kind of say whatever comes to mind. It seems like the how is more important, but then you've got to balance it with, well, you need to be open to receiving the feedback and try your best to take it as a reason to change and a reason to improve. And it just seems like it'd be so much better overall if that was the case. It just seems to be very defensive to me, and that's where some of the hindrance comes from.
Oh, good point. You're right, Mike. It is a very defensive conversation on both sides, where somebody doesn't want to change and somebody is afraid of the retribution if they say something. I'm afraid. I don't know how they're going to respond. If I open my mouth, is it really my place? Yes, it definitely is both sides. And when somebody gets defensive about the feedback, it's very, very hard to break through that wall, and their feelings get hurt. And then you're dealing with a whole other mesh, it's a mismatch of emotion that you start to deal with. And it's very hard in a corporate setting because most people really don't want to deal with all that emotional overlay of, oh my gosh, they're hurt, so on and so forth. It is difficult. At the same time, you actually don't have a choice.
That's an interesting point. Why would you say that we don't have a choice? Try and unpack that.
Yeah, it does go much deeper. When somebody gets hurt, okay, what ends up happening is that the message is typically delivered with a feeling of blame and judgment. So it comes out as when you say these things this way, my feelings are hurt. You hurt me. It happens in relationship also, right? Therefore, what is heard is that you are a hurtful person. And now I am going to protect myself, right? Because you just told me I'm hurtful. So is this tracking so far for you?
Yeah, it seems like a combination of they start to think a certain thing about the person that's giving the feedback because of how it's delivered. Like it translates into something that's reflective of them as a person.
Right, exactly. So now um, I am going to defend myself. I am not a cruel, I'm not trying to hurt you, right? And so now we are going to argue about me being a hurtful person. And I am going to tell you and argue that You're not listening to me. It's not about me being hurtful. I'm right. What I am saying to you is right and you're wrong. And we're going to get into an I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm going to dig my heels in about you not listening to me. And we are going to get completely off topic. And you're going to start to say, it's like another analogy on this is when you call customer service, for instance, and you're angry about your product, and the customer service person isn't helpful. So you start screaming at the customer service person because you're so frustrated. And then the customer service person says, I'm not going to talk to you because you're screaming at me. And then you're in a fight about screaming at the customer service person when all you wanted was to help. I'm screaming at you because you're not helping me. I'm not going to talk to you because you're screaming at me and you're completely off topic and you're not getting any help. It's the same thing that happens at work. You get off topic and defensive and you're not helping me, right? We're not working together. Well, you're abusive. And that is the feedback between coworkers that goes completely off track. I walk in and I start dealing with the individuals with, okay, everybody back off, sit down, deep breath. Let's talk about what's going on. What is the communication and what are you actually trying to say to one another? And that's where we start. What is the message? So we start with truth without blame and judgment. What do you really want to say? And what ends up happening is that it's typically one person's priority is not the other person's priority. And that's typically what it comes down to. And one person is arguing to have the other person do what they need done. And that's what they're fighting for. Person number two has a different set of priorities and they're trying to do their job. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it did. And I wonder whether it's easier to have the priorities laid out for everybody for that hour or for that day. But it seems like a very complicated idea if it's constantly shifting and having to rewrite them every 20 or 30 minutes when things get done and things are coming in that need to get done, that need to be assigned somewhere. It can become a very complicated problem to actually solve.
It is, and priorities do shift. And I think that is what you hear all the time, right? Priorities are always shifting. I never know what I'm supposed to do. And that is the real world, is what happens. It's frustrating.
It is frustrating actually because it's something that probably happens a lot, and then you've got to have these conversations. And I like what you said. What are you actually trying to say to the other person? What do you actually want to say? And then that can often lead to things being clearer or a little bit blunt, I guess you could say. But then is it better to do that than to talk through hoops, say the right thing in the right way when realistically all you need to do is just tell them straight.
Right. Just say it. Absolutely. It is something it's interesting because we think that we should, I love that word, we should be able to go through our day and just speak and not have to take a deep breath, slow down, and actually think before we open our mouths.
How would you suggest people get into that mindset of thinking before you speak? Because in certain circumstances, you never really get to the speaking part.
Yeah, which is probably a good thing where you get to listen more. But um, it, I personally use the acronym WAIT, WAIT. Why am I talking? And I don't use it to shut up, but I use it literally. Why am I talking? To help myself stop and decide what is my point. And it is particularly useful if I feel myself getting triggered and emotional. That's when it's really important because as soon as the emotions kick in, I know I'm about to start pushing for my point of view. There is something going on that's really important to me, and I'm going to fight for it.
I like what you mentioned earlier about being yourself and being authentic. And I know we're gradually touching on it more and more as we're trying to communicate. We're trying to say things clearer in like a bid to be transparent almost. We're just trying to be as truthful as possible. How would you suppose that is achieved where you might not always like the truth, but we still need to be in the environment where it's encouraged or even celebrated to try and be as accurate and as clear and as truthful as we can be?
Yeah. Isn't it funny that that's even a, a question for us? How do we be authentic? Uh, it's so interesting. And what are we even talking about, right? Um, to be authentic, and we are taught don't hurt other people. And that is so important and so ingrained, and that it's easier to change yourself than go near hurting someone else. I can take it. I would not put somebody else in that position. I'll protect them. And that nobody teaches us that it's not fair to do that to someone else. I don't know where this started in society, but being you is okay. And that it is that deep breath of just asking yourself, how do I feel right now? Going with who am I right now? And that we even have to practice that is crazy, but we actually do. And it's okay. And we just have to practice being ourselves. And how do we feel? And we know what our values are. We know that. So showing up as yourself in the situation and trusting that the best thing you can possibly do is just be you and not worrying about the whether you're liked or accepted or loved or any of those things. That most importantly, whatever the response is, it's to you and not some other human being that you're pretending to be.
I completely understand that, but, and this is me throwing a spanner in the works, Alison, because there will be people that are listening that will use authentic as a reason to be blunt or say things without any real bedside manner whatsoever. And everyone says, "Oh, I'm just being authentic." So, okay, well, it's hard to not take this personal now because are you just a horrible person that's just being yourself, or are you actually trying to say things appropriately or trying to say it in a way that the other person can take and use to benefit the company or their life in general? So there are people that will be, let's just say, horrible, for want of a better expression, but they use authenticity as an excuse to do that just because it makes them feel better.
Wow. Yes, you're absolutely right. And that is, I guess, going back to my example of my being using being a Jersey girl and that style as an excuse for being a lioness and bulldozing people. Underneath it, I wanted to be honest, but I was being cruel and bulldozing people, and that's not okay. The authentic part was being honest. My intention was not to be mean, and showing up as a cruel human being is not okay. And I agree with you. Using authenticity as I am just a cruel human being. Um, you can do that. You can choose to be mean and say, that's who I am. I am just rotten. And everybody else can choose to not be with you because you are truly an awful human being. And I, as a leader in a corporation, will therefore choose to let you go because you do not fit into my culture, and I will choose to not be around you. I won't tolerate that behavior.
I suppose that's the spider's web of relationships, isn't it? You can choose to do your thing, but then you've got to, I guess, allow the other person to choose to do their thing. So you can be whoever you want, but then you can't not then take responsibility for the consequences of that.
Right. Absolutely. You can choose to be that way, but I absolutely will choose to not be anywhere near you.
How would you suppose we balance all of this? Because I'm aware it's becoming very intense the way that we're speaking about communication, but then authenticity, and then trying to do right by other people and listening to everybody and trying to do right by other people as well as hopefully doing things that benefit the company. It seems like an impossible job to be able to do all of this and still, in some respects, please the company, please employees, please yourself, hopefully. How do we do it? How do we do this thing called leadership when, after everything that we've spoken about, people might think, well, it's just not really worth it. It's just far too difficult.
It is hard. And I think that it's doable when you think about dynamic balance. When you look at balance as being dynamic and not static, it comes into better view, where sometimes it's going to be more one thing than another. And that sometimes one side is going to get more attention than another. And in the end, it all does kind of balance out. And that on any given day, nothing is absolutely perfect, but we grow all the time. And that actually all we have is where we are today. So today has to be enough in order to be happy and satisfied, and that we accept ourselves as who we are now, and that we're not always in a state of disappointment and sadness and feeling that we're not enough, because we're not where we will be tomorrow. It's true. There's more growth and more coming, and we're not there today. And that's why today has to be enough for today. It's not enough for tomorrow, but it is enough for today. So it's okay. We are here, and it's more than yesterday, and it's not enough for tomorrow, but it is enough for today. And that dynamic balance is a good thing, and it's okay now, and it will be better, and that's good. That's hope.
That's a fantastic idea. And I think a lot of people would need to hear that and try to implement it. And more people need to feel like there is hope and that there is progress and hopefully some joy in the work that they're doing. And I think everyone would be better off because of it.
We all need it. I agree. Hope is so important for all of us. And I know I am absolutely not willing. I live in the United States and I am not willing to give up my me to what is going on in the United States. They can't have me. That's my hope. I have me. I have control of me and my thoughts and who I am. And I am part of making tomorrow better.
Do you have any last pieces of advice for those that are listening, Alison, and then share how people can find out more about you as well?
I think my last piece on leadership would be that leadership has absolutely nothing to do with your title. That leadership is about your sphere of influence as a human being and those people that you touch in your life and being able to connect and listen to others. Really, really listen and be curious about the people that are around you and making those human connections. That's what a leader is. I feel very strongly about it. And we all have that potential in us.
And if those listening would like to enter your world, Alison, possibly see what you're up to, how can people do that?
Best way to find me and follow me is through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I really connect with people. You can get in touch with me. You can send me messages. Um, Please connect with me there.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Alison, it's been great. Thanks so much. And I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.